to acknowledge the past, present, and future of Indigenous people and to recognize the ever-present systemic
Tenemos este
inequities
tiempo
stemming directly from past
para reconocer
wrongdoings and
a
strive
los
to commit
nativos
ourselves
americanos.
indefinitely to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustices for all people. Omaha Table Talks was initially recreated in Omaha in 2003 by the Social
El
Justice
Table Talk
Advisory
fue
Committee of
creado
Catholic Charities
originalmente en
Omaha.
2003 en Omaha
And in 2012, Inclusive Communities took them over into this larger format that
y
we know
empezó
them
con
today.
12 comunidades y
And
después
so then with the pandemic, we
fue una
switched
gran
to
cosa.
virtual. And now we
Después de
are
la
in this
pandemia
hybrid setting
del
so that
COVID
we can reach as
empezó a
many
ser
people as
virtual
possible. And we are appreciative of the technology for that reason.
y le
If
agradecemos
you are not
también por la
aware,
tecnología que
Table Talks
tenemos
as a program has
dispuesta
expanded
para
and grown.
poder
So
hablar
we
con
not only
ustedes.
have our Omaha Table Talks, which cover more general, broader conversations, if you will, but we
Tenemos
also
un Table
have
Talks
Table
de
Talks
Omaha,
for the queer community or on topics
pero
within the
tenemos
queer
Table Talks para la
community,
comunidad de
within
queer,
the Native and Indigenous community, and then within the
con los nativos americanos también.
wow, I'm AAPI community. And so we're always open and looking forward to other topic
Entonces
ideas.
estamos
If
abiertos
you
todo el
have one,
tiempo.
please write that in on the survey evaluation form at the end of today's topic.
Tenemos una forma de evaluación en la
we'll take
encuesta
those in mind as we for future
puede llenar
conversations.
si tiene sugerencias
I would like to
para
thank
que
our
tomamos
sponsors and
en cuenta.
acknowledge them: the Lozier Foundation, Cox Communication, American Family Insurance, Humanities Nebraska, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and United We Stand. We thank them for sponsoring this program
Le
and
agradecemos a
helping make
Cox,
it happen.
a otras
And I also like to
comunidades que nos
thank our
ayudaron
panelists and our
a
moderator
hacer
for
que
being
esos
here
Table
today,
Talks sea posible.
and our ASL interpreters, Pam and Jamie, for being here as
Tenemos
well.
intérpretes,
And we
PM y
also
Jamie también,
have
le
Spanish
agradecemos
language
por estar
interpreters
aquí.
available online. If you
Tenemos
do need to use
intérpretes
their
que
resources,
están en línea
please
también.
just message Katie in the chat and she will get you
Pueden
connected
enviar
to
un
those
mensaje
folks.
a Kerry en el chat si tienen preguntas.
All right. Thank you
Está
to our
bien.
volunteers in the room. I know we have a few
Gracias
new
por los
volunteers
voluntarios que
today.
están
That's
aquí en la
exciting, and
sala.
thank you for being here.
Gracias por
And
estar
now I'm
aquí.
going to turn it over to our moderator. Before
Ahora voy a
I do want to mention
pedirle a
though,
nuestra
part of
moderador
today's conversation is going to be on
que
the word
empezará
disability.
la
So I know
conversación
our
de
title
hoy.
of this
Vamos a
conversation
hablar
is disability
de
justice, but we will be
la
talking about
discapacidad por la
that word
justicia
and the impact of that word as well.
y cómo eso impacta el mundo.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody.
Buenos días, buenas tardes a todo el mundo.
I'm going to serve as your moderator for this table
Voy a
talk.
ser su moderador por esta
Why don't
sesión.
we just go down the panel and have everybody introduce themselves? We're going to
¿Por
start
qué
at
no
the far
empezamos
end
con
with
las
Timothy
presentaciones primero
and then come back towards me.
y
Good
después?
morning, everyone.
Buenos
My
días,
name is
todo el mundo.
Tim Jefferson. I am
Me
with
llamo Tim
the
Jefferson.
Omaha, the district supervisor for the
Soy el
Omaha
supervisor del
office
distrito
of
de
the
Omaha, de la
Nebraska
oficina de
Commission
Omaha,
for the
y
Blind and
en la
Visually
comisión de
Impaired here.
Nebraska por los que no pueden ver
Anything else,
o
Elizabeth?
que no pueden
Okay.
oír.
I'm Tiff Clifton, and I have the pleasure of serving as the
Me
Executive
llamo
Director
Clifton
of
y tengo el
Possibilities for
placer
Gotta Be
de
Me.
servir.
And we walk, roll, stroll alongside individuals with disabilities and their families throughout the
Vamos
community.
a individuales que tienen discapacidades y con sus familias también.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Wulf. I am
Hola a
the Youth
todos, me llamo
Family
Ashley Wulf.
Specialist for the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing.
Como un especialista.
Okay, and like I said before, my name is Elizabeth Ambrose. I am working with Inclusive Communities. I'm currently a member of their cohort, and I work for a hotel chain, Omni Hotels Reservation Centers, where I'm located in West Omaha. And my official title is HR payroll specialist, but I've kind of taken over the DEI umbrella for our company. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to start with Tiff. And the first question that we're going to talk about is, you know, how Dom had mentioned that we're going to use the word disability. So the name of this table talk is disability justice. So I'd like you to define what that term means to you. What does disability justice mean to you?
So full disclosure, the panel and Elizabeth and I spoke yesterday and had a conversation about the idea of disability justice. And I serve today on behalf of everybody that I work with and my younger brother, of which I got to be me exists. And so we talk a lot about the idea of the word disability and folks, whether or not they believe that they are disabled, whether or not they identify as disabled, whether or not other people identify them as disabled. And this is the conversation that we're having a lot. Because a lot of folks that have a diagnosis don't necessarily identify themselves as part of their intersectionality as disabled. And this is a conversation that we haven't had publicly a lot, that, you know, I have a lot of wheelchair users that I work with on a daily basis, and half of them would say, I'm not disabled, I just roll. I don't walk. That's the deal. And so it's a really interesting space to talk about the word disability and disabled. And then when we're talking about justice, I believe that in my heart of hearts, we're always talking about equity and equality, right? So equality is the idea that everybody in this room could be given the 2-step ladder. But is that really equity? No, because I'm a lot shorter than the person maybe sitting next to me. And the reality is that justice for me and the folks that I work with on a daily basis means that everyone has an equal platform to move from. And so that's where I start that conversation.
Timothy, what about you?
Yes, so as part of this discussion about disability, one of the things that I shared with the yesterday with the panel members is as far as a disability, I hadn't really, quite honestly, I hadn't really thought about. I know that blindness is a disability, but I've really never considered myself to be disabled. And so not thinking about it in those, or thinking about it in those terms, again, just caused me to, you know, in all transparency, I said, I never really thought about this thing of just being disabled, because I am fortunate enough that despite not being able to see as well as a sighted person, it doesn't make me disabled to where I can't go and do what I want to do. I can live independently. I do live independently as much as I can. My family will tell you sometimes I live too independently. I work full-time employment, competitive employment where it's a livable wage. I'm also a pastor. I engage in sports. I do many of the same things that a sighted person would do. So having the inability to see does not cause me to think of myself as disabled. And so we were talking about that, and that was the input that I shared on yesterday.
Ashley, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I resonate a lot with Tim in regards to being a deaf person. You know, within the deaf community, we really don't identify ourselves as a disability or a disabled person. It's a medical term. So we've got the medical community deciding what our identity should be, and we don't want that. You know, we don't want our so-called disability to be the first thing that you look at. You know, we're human beings. We're able to do a lot of different things. We have a deaf blind person who works in the White House, right? Like, so there you go. We have deaf or hard of hearing people working in different levels of state government, federal government, deaf professors. You know, there's really the opportunity there is there for us. We just can't hear. So we can literally do everything as a hearing person. We just can't hear. So it pretty much really kind of parallels exactly what Tim was just saying, as for someone who is blind comparing to a sighted person.
I would have to agree with basically everybody on the panel. When we were talking yesterday, I said the same thing. I don't really see myself as disabled either. I just sit down all the time and I'm just a little shorter than other people. But when I gotta get stuff done, I get it done. So it doesn't matter if it takes me a little longer, I'm still gonna get it done. Like Tim, I work full time. I have competitive wages. Um, if you guys went to Inclusive Communities website and read a little bit about me as the moderator today, you know, I travel all over the world. I mean, you know, I get the privilege of being first on the airplane, but it really kind of sucks because I'm the last one off the airplane. But I don't see those as, I just don't see myself as disabled, I guess, is what I'm really trying to get to. With that said, so the other part of the term, justice. So let's follow up on that and let's talk about what do we define as injustice when we're talking about this? Ashley, we're gonna let you go first on this one.
Well, injustice for deaf and hard of hearing people probably would be that we're denied or we don't receive access to communication barriers, you know, whether it be the hospital, prison system, educational system. It could be here, you know, hypothetically saying it could really be in a classroom. It could really be anywhere that a person would attend. We have to reach out in advance. We almost have to fight every time to get that access. If we want CART, which is real-time captioning, or getting a tactile interpreter for a deafblind person, or getting a personal listening device, we're constantly fighting to receive access to communication. And that's where injustice happens for us because those requests are often denied. And that's not just here locally, but really worldwide. It is a huge struggle within the accessibility part of this world. We do have to go through a lot and oftentimes filing grievances in order to get the access that we deserve to have. Within the deaf and hard of hearing community, there's often a denial because of this superiority complex. Really, the fact is that we have that right. It is a human right, but there's a lot of fear from individuals filing grievances because they feel that maybe if they file that grievance, that may lead to further oppression or marginalization.
I let Tim answer first. I'm still thinking. Is that okay?
That was a good one. All right. So one of the things that I thought about in thinking of see, this is why Tiff should have went first. No, one of the things that I thought about when we talk about justice, and I want to add another piece to what Ashley was saying. Justice, it comes in the form of access or lack thereof. And I was looking up at this definition, and there was some intersectionality where it talked about access to different opportunities, self-determination, and what role does that all play in this term that we call justice today? And so I really want to kind of focus my attention on more of the self-determination, because as a blind person, oftentimes the access to different opportunities is because of lack of education on the part of other people or employers, i.e. And so what does that mean for me as a blind person when I'm wanting the access, needing the access? How do I get the access? And so one of the things that I find is, particularly in the blind community, maybe some of the other panelists can address this too, but it's so important that as I learn to adjust to the issues, to blindness myself, people are going to respond in the way that whatever I put out, that's how they're going to respond. So I think it's also important that we not only, we look for that access, we fight for it. We have to, but also we have to know how to fight. And sometimes fighting for that access or gaining it means that we have to educate people about the disability, whatever that may be, and I'll say this and I'm stalling here. I'm giving Tiffany a long time to think. So, but education sometimes can come in the form of, if I'm at a restaurant and there's a 2 or 3 year old kid or child that keeps trying to touch my cane, and the parents are saying, no, no, don't touch it. No, don't, they're trying to be polite, but then I know that that child is curious. So now education side in me kicks in and says, no, it's okay. Let him touch it or let her touch it. This is a cane. This is what blind people use when they have a hard time seeing. So now my education is, even though I'm talking to that child, guess who else is listening? Their parents. And their parents can be some of the employers that we may deal with. So I wanted to include that part of this definition, the self-actualization or self-determination as part of this talk that we're having.
Thanks for the stall. I appreciate it. So I wanted everybody else to answer first because we talked about this yesterday. We could talk about this for days. The reality when I speak with my peeps about the idea of injustice is the idea of less than and having to fight for the equity piece. But the first piece that we talk so much about is less than. That the idea that we have high schools in this city, that we have high schoolers who are rolling into in manual wheelchairs and electric wheelchairs and they don't fit through the door. And so the ask is of these students is that they don't use the restroom while they're at high school. That's a huge injustice. And the ask then becomes the conversation about, well, the teachers do it. Well, that's an injustice as well. That doesn't make it better. It just makes it true of something that's happening. The idea of injustice is that you are feeling, or a group of people are feeling, or we are all feeling less than. And the reality is the fight to the equal playing field, whatever that might be. And so for my peeps in my fold, that could be anything on any given day. It could be the parking lot, that the person who plowed the parking lot has no concept that you can't plow all of the snow into the accessible spot with the lines next to the parking spot, right? This person's not doing this on purpose. This person's trying to plow the snow to get it out of the way. They don't understand that that means you can't open the door of the van to get the ramp out, right? That seems very simple, but the reality is that it's not something that's thought about by that person because it's not something that they live every day. And so that's where the conversation of the idea of injustice comes. And I think when we use that word, everybody gets a little prickly, right? That we think that this is going to be an aggressive, conflict-filled conversation. But the reality of justice and injustice is we're just trying to make sure everybody has what they need so their basic rights are met and that everybody in the room is educated, right? I've often had folks come up and say, I can't get somewhere, and then had somebody say, oh, did you know there's a ramp on the other side of the building? Well, no, nobody knows there's a ramp on the other side of the building, but now we're really excited that we know that everybody knows that. Nobody's knees in this room wants to do stairs. We all want a ramp. It's called universal design. It's the idea of universality. That's the deal.
I think it comes down to, like Timothy said, it's education. I mean, and it doesn't have to be a prickly situation. Yeah, you're going to encounter people who are going to just be extra. But you can diffuse that though. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, I can give you at least 10 stories of me on an airplane where I've had to help somebody understand that, you know what, I'm just like you, just because I can't stand up, grab my suitcase and get out of here real quick. Let me help you out. Let me tell you what we need to do to accomplish the goal of getting me off the airplane. So it's just about education. It really is. So when we talk about education, do any of you have any examples of how you've had a situation where you've had to, and I'm using air quotes here, teach somebody something?
I'll share one, and this is kind of a fun. I mean this to be in a fun way. So today, when I walked into the building, I came into the room, had to find the elevator. I came in the wrong parking lot. They dropped me off in, I think, M instead of E. So immediately, I knew I found the elevator. If I get on the second floor, I'm good. I'll find it, right? Went to go use the restroom, and so whoever was helping me, don't make a expression or anything like that, because I don't want to. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. But a good example. When I went to the restroom, walked there, turned left, went right, I could tell that when I was going and coming, people were still watching to make sure I could get to where I'm supposed to get to, right? And so sometimes, people want to be helpful and they don't really know how. So they stand back and just kind of watch. So those are examples sometimes where in a situation like that, there are times where we could stop and say, okay, here's how we find what we need. Here's how I get to where I want to get to. And I shared with you the story about the little child. That's education. When you're teaching a child in front of their parents, the parents are learning vicariously about how a blind person uses a cane. So those are a couple of examples, and I think the airplane example, that is a great one even for me, because if I travel, most times if I ask for assistance, they send a wheelchair to pick me up, right? Now I'm using a cane, but now you want to put me in a wheelchair for the wrong disability. That's a time for education, and then just saying, here's how you can help me. And then we proceed with educating that way. So
Every day is a teaching opportunity. Literally directly before this meeting, I was having a conversation with another local nonprofit, and the question became from them to me if I could come talk to their staff about being available to their participants during their programs, and what's the boundary line for helping. That's a really broad question, right? So the question is the idea that you have a local nonprofit in town who's doing so much good, and they're venturing into new spaces, not their own space. So they're venturing into other buildings to do programming. And now they're wondering, do they need to know where all the defibrillators are? Do they need to have specific training to be in that building? What is their responsibility if someone has a seizure? What happens if the elevator isn't working and folks with walkers and canes and wheelchairs can't get to where they need to be? What happens if someone has a seizure? What are they physically going to do? So every day becomes a teaching moment. And my base answer for that is that every person that we're talking about is a human being, and each person is an individual. And we talk about this a lot at IC, because it's really important, because we all forget that we're all individual people, that we have ways to communicate with each other, that we can ask questions of one another, and we can deny to answer those questions if we want to. And we have that right to do that. And so I think that every day presents a teaching moment in some way, shape, or form, whether or not it's the ramp conversation that nobody's knees love stairs, it's just true, or the fact that if you're doing better because you know better and you're asking more questions of the person or people in the room, that's always a teaching moment. So this brings me to statistics, because I love stats. So the new stats that are a minimum of 1 in 9 of us will be labeled as disabled in our lifetime right now. whether or not that means we have a knee replacement, whether or not it means, as my ophthalmologist likes to tell me, my eyes are mature. So I get to wear these now. Whether it's my good friend had a back surgery and there was a complication and she is now permanently blind. This is new for her. She's 67 years old. She is now labeled as a disabled person with blindness. This is new for her, right? 1 in 9 of us at any given moment in our lifetime. That's how that's going to work out. So the reality is the label that is given to us, unless we have taken it on our own, and the teaching moment becomes to and from, right? From us all and to us all of what that looks like. And so my baseline is always ask the question. And if the person doesn't want to answer, or they want to give you more information, or they want to point you in another direction, they will absolutely do that. It's just like Tim shared his story. We talk about kids a lot because kids just don't lie unless they're trying to get the snack at the end of the night. But the reality is they're going, what is this? What is wrong with you? What is going on? They're asking these questions. And as adults, we've lost this innocence that that question is not insulting. It is not on purpose meant to harm anyone. They're genuinely trying to soak up that information. And I think as adults, we forget that and we are fearful and we don't want to insult anyone and we don't want anyone to feel less than, but we're trying to educate ourselves as well. But we're also trying not to put the onus on somebody else for things that we don't know. But the reality is we're all humans and we have to ask those questions because we don't know. Just like Tim also said, I'm just going to use you for every example today, just how that's going to be. We had this conversation about the word disabled yesterday. And he said, I never really even thought about it. And I love this conversation because I know that in Tim's life that this has been written down, said a million times before. And for him, that's not part of who he is. But nobody ever asked him that question. So I think asking the question is the most important to me.
Ashley, would you agree with that? Do you have an example?
And can you repeat the question, please? I was listening to their comments and I actually forgot the question.
Do you have an example of a time when you had to teach somebody?
Did I have to teach someone at some point? Is that what you're talking about? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, that's part of my job, to educate the community, the stakeholders, the businesses, everyone. And since people who are deaf and hard of hearing often get denied communication, that access to that, they're turned down for that. So possibly because they think, first of all, it costs money and they're responsible to provide the interpreter, pay for that. So they look at the deaf and hard of hearing person for communication access and to provide that. And it's not a responsibility. It's their communication access that they need. So that is what I'm talking to the community about, attorneys and different stakeholders in the community, issues that we face. And that's the daily issue that we face 24/7, no matter where we are. It could be even a drive-through. People that order food have to drive through. They can do that. We can't do that. Sometimes we have to go in person. We want to drive through. And if we do that, we can't speak in the speaker and order our food. And so we will have it maybe on our phone, our order. I gesture that I'm deaf and I show them my phone, but often we're denied that opportunity to order. So again, it's a constant battle and a teaching. Sometimes I have to call the manager and I don't know why they have to do that. But oftentimes that's what happens to people that are deaf and hard of hearing. And so everywhere we are, everyone we're with, often it's a teaching possibility. And it's just, again, just communication access.
Yeah, I would agree with that, the educational piece. One of the examples that I have is one year, my ex-husband and I, we were still together then. He was stationed, he was based TDY. He works for a major airline. He was based TDY in Boston. So my son and I went out to see him. We were there for a week. We had a good time. It was great, blah, blah, blah. So I come back to work and the general manager of the hotel that I was staying in and his reservations manager, they're visiting our call center. And I had a relationship with the reservation manager because she's the one who made my reservation. And she's like, oh, how was your stay, Elizabeth? And I was like, it was great, except for the night that my husband got locked out of the room. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, the beds are extremely high and he had to help me get into the bed. Then he decided he wanted to go get a snack. So he went down to the, the lobby area, came back up, didn't have his key. There was no way I was going to transfer out of that bed into my chair because I can guarantee I would have wound up on the floor because the bed was that high. So I'm telling her this and she's like, what do you mean it's too high? I said, it's not easy for me to transfer. I mean, I have to have help to get in and out. And she's like, I knew it. And I'm like, what do you mean you knew it? She's like, come with me, come with me. And she's like, I need you to come into this conference room right now and talk to him. I'm like, him who? And it was the general manager. And she's like, see, I told you those beds were too high. Listen to her story. And the beds got lowered after that. So, but it's an educational thing. And in that case, I was basically telling him it's a safety thing too. You can't, I work for you. So I'm going to know all the ins and outs of how to get taken care of if I fall out the bed. But that is not my goal. It's not to fall out of the bed. So the educational piece is always something that we have to, I guess, carry with us to let everybody else know.
Well, it's perspective, right?
Yeah.
So the general manager had no perspective of that.
No clue.
No perspective because it's not something that he's doing on a daily
Because
basis.
he can get in the bed.
Because he can
didn't
get
out
in
of the bed.
That's
Way
right.
out, falling
Right.
on his face.
Right.
Yep, exactly. So it's all about perception, perspective, how you handle a situation. Just like Timothy was saying with, no, let your child come in, this is the cane that I use because I need to get around. So I use the same thing with my wheelchair. I have lighted wheels on the front. I work in a kids ministry and the kids, they're always like, I don't know about going up to her. And then they'll see the wheels and they'll be like, oh my gosh, those wheels are so cool. And then you can't shut them up after that. I mean, but it's like an icebreaker, that's what I'm just really trying to get at. It's an icebreaker. And we should never be afraid to approach anybody because just like Tiff said, if we want to talk, we're going to talk. If we're not feeling up to it, we're going to say, you know what, I'm not feeling too hot today. Can we just not have this conversation? And nobody ever has to be rude. It's just life.
Can I add just something to the?
Sure.
And I'm thinking about everyone in this room when we're talking about education, and all of us have these wonderful stories that we share. How does that really get us the access that we need, or how does that increase the possibility of us getting the access that we need? So often I work within the blind community, and not everybody, but there's a significant amount of blind people who will jump to ADA. You have to do this. You are required by law, and those fights have to take place and they are taking place, legislation and things like that. But sometimes when I think of education and gaining access to certain things, many times, and I don't have any research to back me up on this, but I'm just going after my own experiences. Oftentimes, educating someone or projecting confidence or letting them see me use the tools, the skills, the things that I need, that oftentimes gets me more access into the areas or the things that I need than it would if I threatened the person or the agency employer, with NEOC or ADA or whatever that is. So as you're sitting and listening to our stories, if you have those experiences, just think about that. You're trying to get access into something. Is the way that you want to get to that justice working for you? And if not, what do you do? I'm not the moderator. I'm sorry. I just thought about that. That's one of our questions. I think
it's actually, we only have a few more minutes, so we're going to wrap it up here. But it's actually a good point. The point is, as we look out at everybody who's come to this table talk, what we need to really, I guess, get over to you guys is you don't have to be somebody special to be an advocate. You know, you really don't. It's just taking that time to come. I'll there's so many examples of, you know, people just coming and speaking and saying, hey, that sidewalk out there has a big crack in it. Do you think you could probably get maintenance out here to fix it? Because it's going to cause problems for my brother, my sister, my mom. They use a walker, they're in a wheelchair, anything like that. We really just want to let you guys know that it doesn't take a lot to be an advocate. You don't have to be somebody with a title. You could be somebody's next door neighbor. You know, that's all you have to be, is really what we're trying to get across here. And with that said, let's wrap it up here. And oh, we have a question. Go ahead.
What we're talking about is visible disabilities. You know, I can see your chair, I can see your cane, but there's something that I think that's really missing here is that there's a lot of invisible disabilities, such as like ADHD or ADD. And those individuals often have to fight for different access because they are disabled or consider themselves as disabled and denied access. You know, as a person who has ADHD, and people have recognition of what that term means. But there's a lot of misconceptions in regards to that. You know, people can be highly successful and still have ADHD. They just may have, you know, a little navigating effort to try to accommodate certain things. Like, for example, I can't sit for very long, right? So I do think that that's a special consideration that we have to think about for people who don't, for people who have invisible disabilities and who also struggle to have equal access to certain things. And to just recognize them as people also. My son is in a public school at the Elkhorn district and has had to fight for certain things. And then out of that, there was an altercation that happened between him and another peer because they questioned his ability to do certain things. And my son's not one to disclose to others that he has ADHD because he doesn't feel like he has to explain that to other students, right? Like they don't have familiarity with it. So it just feels like, you know, there's a situation that's brewing here. And the leaving students kind of feeling unsure and feeling bad about their attendance at school. And it's hard for him specifically because he just came from a private school and now he's at a public school. So we're maybe looking at putting him back in a private school. But anyway, just the idea of students and people wanting to feel connected and not having to share their disability, but feel that they can truly have access and build friendships socially, where some children who are in these kinds of circumstances often are isolated because others don't understand. So anyway, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that about invisible disabilities.
And I appreciate you sharing. Thank you so much. Anybody has any final thoughts?
I'm trying not to test. Okay. So I'm just trying to make sure, and I know you're trying to wrap it up. People we work in the schools with a lot of students, and sometimes people have those hidden disabilities. So I want to just put this question out for consideration. We want our students, I'll just say the students that we work with, we teach them self-advocacy skills. And meaning that there are things that if people don't know, you can't really ask them to understand something if they don't know about it. And while we do want to have access and want to be connected and not necessarily have to share in life at some point, I think all of us will have to share with, you know, those who are connected to us. So that's a bigger question. I mean, it's a bigger conversation, but it's just a question that, you know, do you want your son to know how to advocate for himself if he's in, if you're going back to private school and then they say, well, you don't have to say anything because we understand you. But long term, what does that look like? And how is that going to help your son when he gets to be into the greater society? So it's a bigger conversation, but it's just something that, we, want you to, I would say, please consider that.
Panelists, thank you very much. This was a fantastic conversation. We do want to make sure we get to the table talk portion of the day. So we are going to spend about 20 minutes or so. I think, does every table have a facilitator? Okay, we will figure out who the facilitators are in this room. And then we'll give you about 20 minutes or so to discuss. We'll come back and we will do a share out. So this is not, you do not have to do this, but you may want to pick someone ahead of time to do the share out or wing it, whatever works for you. And then if we have some time left over at the end, we'll open it up in case some folks have questions from our panel as well. Cool. And grab some sandwiches. There's some left over in the back. Well, you had some good conversations at your tables. We are going to do a little share out now. Dom is going to help run the mic here. And then folks on Zoom, feel free to kind of unmute. But what are kind of some of the highlights of things that everybody talked about during the discussion? Anyone can go first.
Hi, I'll go and just get it out of the way.
Cami.
My name is Lachelle.
Hi, Cami, she, her. So our table, we talked a lot about just kind of our personal connections around having family members that are part of the disability community. We did have the conversation around that language and that labels are just hard because they're so personal. And so as we struggle through the concept of what labels give to certain individuals, it's just listening and being open to being corrected and not doing that with defensiveness, not taking it personally. We then talked about the lack of resources. We thought about how can we advocate and move forward, not only just for in a school level, because we know there are a multitude of challenges on the school level for resources and just that opportunity to access, as Tim talked about, but then thinking about when you get past that stage to young adulthood and even into senior living. So just that there's a lot of work with these systems that are super complicated. And we are a little at like, how do we get started? Where do we go? Where does it come from? Because there's so much that needs to be tackled. But that I think, this is Cami now, personally speaking, I think the acknowledgement that there are those systems, just naming it helps us then start to see where does my power lie to move into working on it next. And maybe that is just for your family to start, but then those are what I like to call the accidental activists, where you started advocating just for you, and then what you learned, then you use that to share with everyone else.
Who wants to follow that?
Oh.
All right.
I don't like downtime. So my group thought about kind of wanting to feel helpful, but how that can result in making other people feel like we are assuming they're helpless, which I thought was really poignant. We talked about kind of individual needs and how there were some really lovely takeaways for kind of individual needs versus best practices that maybe when it comes down to one-on-one interactions, different individuals may just not have the same needs or the same preferences when it comes to accommodation. And then we wrapped up talking a little bit about intersectionality and vulnerability for folks who have, a medical disability, but then also any number of other kind of sites of oppression within state and government facilities. So it's a great conversation.
Thank you. Okay, we had.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Taylor, they, them. We talked about the word disability and just like the conversation around not wanting to be identified as disabled or wanting to be identified as disabled, and how do we remove ourselves from 19th century models of disability, quote unquote, care, and how it shouldn't translate till today. I think we also talked a lot about urban design. We talked about different ways that we can be better advocates and those sorts of things as well. So yeah.
Do we have a group online that would like to share? Yeah, Lachelle, I see your hand raised.
Yep. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes,
Yep,
Yes.
I
go ahead,
had,
Lachelle.
okay. We had a great
Well,
group.
one
Oh,
second,
one
Lachelle.
second, Lachelle, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Try now.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Still cannot hear you.
I think people on Zoom can hear
There
me.
we are.
Okay,
Oh, you can hear me now?
we can hear you now.
Okay, I feel like one of those cell phone commercials. So our group had a really good chat. We talked about the importance of education. We also talked about how disability or disabled was a label that was assigned by the medical community, when really it's just a difference. And why is it even discussed as a disability? There was also some conversation around how there's kind of people who are strongly identify with the word and want to like detach the stigma and look at it as just a descriptor, and then other people who do not like the word. We also talked about the need for dialogue, and how kids are very good at asking questions. They just have that innocence, but as we get to be older, we don't ask those questions. We also talked about how there's less dialogue now that there are laws around things. Someone brought up a really good example about like, you work somewhere and you have a handbook of all these rules and regulations and laws, but you don't actually have a conversation or dialogue with anybody. And then lastly, and this was put in the chat, two members of the group recommended a book by Emily Ladeau called Demystifying Disability. And the link to the book is in the chat, and so is the link to her website. She also has like a podcast. So thank you.
That's great. And we'll make sure to share out. Cool technology. We'll make sure to share out that link as in post. Is there another group, one of the two tables here that would like to share out? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Adrian, and just to piggyback off of a lot of the other groups that did speak, we did speak of it. One was about big on education, even from young to old, and also the ability to assist and be advocates for people. Sometimes you see people who may struggle and ask if they need help, and you see those who you don't know or have a disability, but you still ask them to see if they need help that way. We also talked about lack of resources and just big on education about the disability, the language. We spoke about how Ashley had stated it was assigned by a medical term. And I think it was Lachelle who just said with HIPAA, it's a lot of things you can't say. And then Doris did speak of it. You become vulnerable when you do mention that you do have a disability. And also like the young lady here who said about her son, an invisible disability, because you don't want to be treated differently. Or when you do say you have a disability, some places will back off from you for showing that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so my name is Lydia, she, her. So our table talked about the awareness of like societal awareness of people who have disabilities who are not exactly like visible or who have it like visibly or invisibly. So we just talked about like different places don't really accommodate for people who have disabilities and how that is like a major issue in different places just because like it can either not be like well known in everybody's minds or it can just not be like it can be like a malfunction and it's just not like aware and it's just like not a big deal or it's ignored even though it's like really important. It's like often many people ignore it, and especially with how like with the table, like we talked about like how everybody like have their own experiences that can like be impactful with like the disabled community, and how it's like, oh my gosh, really just important to like think about people who have a disability. And it's just how it's like many people in society just have it like often just ignored, and it's just really important to like really pay attention to it. um and yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Other Zoom group, do we get all the okay, other Zoom groups, who's next?
I could speak on behalf of our Zoom group. My name is Holly and she, her. Grateful to be here. Thank you to all the panelists that have shared today. So our group, we had talked about like invisible disabilities as well. And had kind of talked about one of the exhibits at the Luminarium in the upper level called What's in Your Bag, in which it asks maybe like a series of 10 questions. And depending on how you answer, you take a literal bean bag and put it in your bag. And then you put the other bean bag that didn't correspond with you into the opposite bag. And after you answer the 10 questions, you hold both bags and you can kind of feel the different weights of the bag. And that was, to an entry into talking about like privilege and intersectionality, and just like a great entry point for all ages to begin to talk about that sort of thing. We had also talked about like that word that Tiff had used, the universality, in especially with design. And we had kind of talked about like toilet heights and how the heights of toilet can be beneficial for different people for different reasons, and how oftentimes there's not one right way that is going to be 100% universal for everybody, like that we can all be so unique in terms of like the needs that we have. And then we kind of ended with just saying that we were all just challenged with holding empathy for others' situations, whether it's something visible or non-visible, that we can go through life that way.
Thank you so much. Who's next?
Are there any more? Here for our group. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry, it's all very small, so I couldn't see if it actually worked. So our group talked quite a bit why we came, which was, I think, really grounding for us on what drove us to be part of this particular table talk. And then from there, we spent probably the majority of our time talking about kind of our experiences on either how we individually or our friends or our family identify with the word disability. So some of us kind of identified similarly to the panelists, where others maybe have known folks or have experience where they're very very proud of that disability, and kind of really hold on to the word disability or their individual diagnosis or experience. And so just talked about the variances of how we even just engage with that identity, and then what that means of how we interact with each other. And then the last thing we started to touch about is just accessibility and how universally we can really benefit from accessible spaces and what that might look like, particularly in our workplaces.
That's great. Thank you so much. Is there one last group? Maybe? No? Okay.
There wasn't.
Thank you all very much. That was really great. I also love hearing what everyone talked about and continuing that conversation. I think because we're just about at the end of our time, I do want to give us a minute. If you could, if you have a smartphone, do us a giant favor. Take that smartphone out right now. Katie is going to put a slide up and there's a QR code on there. If you could take a couple of minutes and fill out the evaluation, your feedback helps us make this experience better. There's a place where I think you can suggest topics. So please take a minute to fill that out. And then also please mark on your calendars. We have several more coming up for the rest of the year, but our next table talk is February 21st. This is a partnership with AVP. We have Suzanne in the room here if you have questions about that. This is going to be the life and reentry for the justice impacted. And then we do have one on March. Did we say it was March 20th? This is a daytime one, March 20th, which is going to be about neurodivergency. So maybe piggybacking off of some of the conversations that we heard earlier.
RSVP, the second one is now the.
Okay, this one